you hear? I don't think this was in the program, but since somebody put the music on, I just thought it would be nice to sing the song. Bapuji's favorite song. रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम 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 भज मन प्यारे सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम ईश्वर तेरो नाम ईश्वर तेरो नाम सबको सन्मति दे भगवान रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम 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 Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Well, I don't need to tell you what a wonderful sound it was, but more important what it was the rhythm. But this one here, you want to hear every word I say about it?
No, I want everybody else to hear.
No, I was just beginning with paying compliments to the wonderful way in which you sang.
Thank you.
But the difficulty is simply I used to sing a song. It's not a song. It has been sanctified with some national significance. And also the way in which it is generally sung on certain occasions takes it away from the category of ordinary songs. It's not an ordinary song. It's profoundly significant politically and religiously. And I'm glad the meeting begins with this, although I must reassure Professor Kumar that we are not a religious body. The principle that intellectual matters must be discussed in their own terms, and not be compromised by religious considerations. And that way with us as much as with anything else. And Gandhi also will way. So beginning in this way is intended simply to affirm our multi-religious identity rather than secular identity. Very delighted that we have Professor Kumar with us. I don't know if you read his latest book, but if not, I would strongly urge you to read it. It's splendidly done. And having done some work on Gandhi at some stage in my life, I can spot a gem when I see it, And that certainly is there, as you said, with some confidence. He's a bilingual writer, in the sense that he has written books in English as well as in Hindi. More importantly, he has also written about children, books of engaging the attention and sympathies of children. Very prolific writer in that sense, and I think we are absolutely delighted that he should have accepted our invitation to come and join us this afternoon. I must apologize for the sparseness of the audience, but that's what happens when you try to combine two conflicting considerations. One, to have a lecture at a big place, big people, and secondly, in a significant place. And a significant place does not necessarily attract large crowds. Things we hold. There's significance to us anyways, but it's not a place where you can expect dazzling lights and dazzling music and boutiques and malls and all that. It's quietly tucked away in a corner of an estate, and that's its charm. So with those few words about the environment and about ourselves, I would like you to deliver the Gandhi Memorial Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kari. I'm greatly honored to have been invited to deliver the Gandhi Foundation's annual lecture. 5 years ago, when I had nearly completed this book on Gandhi, something happened that didn't let me think that it was ready for submission to a publisher. 2020, the official announcement was made that India would be under a lockdown, and indeed many countries in the world chose lockdown as the way to deal with the pandemic called COVID-19. It was a strange time in every sense of the term. I remember scenes from the lane where we lived in the city of Chandigarh. The scenes were quite unusual. To begin with, in the sense that nature seemed to be quite free now with our lane. I saw peacocks crossing the street, which was unthinkable before COVID. Cats and dogs, of course, were there, and a sense of complete quietness that you could not call peace as such. It was the only word that one could use for the environment which COVID brought upon our city, and indeed upon the rest of the country and perhaps the world. It was a difficult time in many ways, but also a time that broke several categories of one's mind. I had this book ready with me about Gandhi, on which I had worked for some time. And a friend had warned me that this is going to be another book on Gandhi. There are hundreds of books written on Gandhi in various languages of the world. If you visit the Nehru Museum, now renamed, in Delhi, the first 4 tall bookshelves are called the Gandhiana, and they literally have a few thousand books written on Gandhi in different languages, apart from the collected works of Gandhi and so on. So why write another book, was this friend's advice to me. And it was a good advice, but when you are an author and you have worked on something, you don't like that kind of advice. You think it's okay, another book, all right. The world can take one more academic book on Gandhi. But when COVID-19 hit the world, one began to feel very differently about many things, and Gandhi was one of them. To begin with, I noticed that the categories based on development, this mystic word of the 20th century, this mystical word, which was so pervasive throughout my teaching career, this word called development, could no more be used as a way to divide the world, because the so-called developed countries were as disturbed by COVID and as unprepared as the developing world to which India still officially belongs, let alone the underdeveloped of Africa and several other parts of the world. This notion that somehow the developed world is better prepared to face any future dissolved within a few days as we begin to see on television screens people dying in the United States, unlooked after, and then Europe, United Kingdom, and so on. It was a strange experience to realize that between riches and poverty, between the wealthy and the poorer nations, there was not much distinction left as far as the spread of the pandemic was concerned and how it was affecting life. And then the state, how the state in all countries of the world behaved at that point in the pandemic and for the coming 2.5 to 3 years was itself a reminder that something was off the hinges, that there was no way that we could not accept that we were going through a new kind of experience. Even though the world had good records of the previous sort of universal pandemic of exactly 100 years earlier, and there have been minor pandemics since then, but this one dissolved so many notions, especially about the notion that some states are more liberal than others. I have trusted, as a good colonized citizen, I have always trusted the BBC. And on BBC, I waited for 2.5, 3 years to hear an open interview about the pandemic, about ways in which states were handling it, governments were handling it, people's choices and so on. No, that interview has yet to come. And one noticed that the state's behavior was very similar to how it was described in 1875 when the plague hit India. A friend of mine has made a film on it, so I knew a little bit more as to how the colonial state dealt with the plague. But memories of the 1919 pandemic, which Gandhi had faced without much preparation for it or medication, and it's reported that in one of his public addresses his legs were shaking. He was that much affected by it. Yes, the state was very much at the center of this turmoil that the pandemic had caused quite suddenly. And then there was this peculiar phenomenon that was unfolding in my country. All my life, as a teacher of educational theory, borrowing from sociology and psychology and economics and where not, I had taught that villagers go to cities in order to find work and to seek some sort of security of life. That's where the health system seems to work better, not in villages. And within a few days of the lockdown, one heard that millions of migrant laborers in our big cities like Bombay, now called Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, were walking to their villages because there was no transport. The idea that all these people thought that they would be safer in their village than in the city was a complete, you can say, unmistakable challenge to several theories in modern sociology, particularly the theory of modernization and the relations between cities and villages across the world. Raymond Williams talked about that relation in his City and the Village in the context of England, how England lost so much of its countryside that now the countryside resides only in our minds and hearts, and of course in literature. In India, the village is still there, and it's a fairly big area to imagine. But the idea that people who had migrated from villages years, in some cases decades ago, in search of work and livelihood and safety, and for their children's education, would abandon the city so quickly and in such a determined way that if nothing was available for them to walk back home, hundreds of miles, in some cases thousands, would start walking without any protection on the highways, the roads, and yet that was the reality of that time, which on visual media at that time, the only media you could actually trust for this, like now, is good old, not so old, but now we call it in a friendly way the YouTube. And the YouTube was full of these images of people walking with their children. And as years unfolded, many didn't go back to their cities, which is a conundrum which no major social scientist has yet explained. What happened to these people? How did they get adjusted to the village without their jobs? In education, we know that many did not ever take their children back home, back to the city, even if they went back to the city for work in the factories where they were working earlier. So this whole situation was so unusual, unfamiliar, and difficult to explain. And in some uncanny way, one might say, it reminded one of Gandhi. Gandhi, in my teaching career, has always been a source of a fight, the idea of a fight. Marjorie Sykes wrote her famous biography of Gandhi with Jahangir Patel, and she called it Gandhi, the gift of the fight. And that's how my generation knew him since our childhood, that he was a fighter. But suddenly in that atmosphere of COVID, this quietness around, that you were not free even to walk in a park, I felt Gandhi was a source of solace. That he gave a strange kind of peace in that oppressive, very insecure atmosphere, because everybody, and I was no exception, we were all scared of getting the virus. And the preparation for the universal cure was still several months away. Gandhi became a strange source of solace, and I started to read my manuscript again. And when I started reading it, I felt very unhappy with it in many ways. And I decided to read a little more of Gandhi and on him. And I thought, let me also read some of the obituaries written when he died, when he was assassinated. So I read Orwell's most famous obituary, and Wade Mehta's obituary, and so on. And I began to realize that I had actually not properly understood Gandhi. And yes, as an academic book, it would have been yet another book, but not worth publishing as something exciting to publish. And that's when this idea, in a somewhat mysterious way, emerged, that perhaps I was looking at Gandhi in an old, stereotyped, irrelevant way. There was something more to the man that I had to acknowledge in this very rarefied atmosphere of COVID-19. And that's where the book turned. and became a work of fiction. A mixture of fiction with non-fiction. Hard to classify. It became a book that would create a problem for bookshops, librarians, academics. We are all creatures of classification. What is a library but a grand system of separating science from arts? Social sciences are further divided, languages and so on. This wonderful classificatory organization of the mind that one has dissolved in that period when I started to rework on my book. I find it very much expected that bookshops now have a problem putting this book in an appropriate rack. In my own city a few months ago, when I was looking for a copy to give to a friend, I asked the shopkeeper and he said, I've seen the book, it's in the computer, but where it's placed I don't remember. And finally he looked it up and it was put under biography. Yes, he thought perhaps, and some people do think that perhaps it's biography of Gandhi, and some have made the mistake of thinking that I have used my autobiographical experience to talk about Gandhi. I do wish you good luck when you start to look at it. It's about to be released in UK in a month's time. A few copies the Gandhi Foundation could get, and I'm very grateful to the Gandhi Foundation for organizing this lecture where I could talk about Gandhi in the context of this experience that I had about his presence and what he did for me. The key question with which we can begin this discussion is fiction incompatible with truth? If you choose the answer that yes, it's incompatible, then we are left with the historical Gandhi. We are left with the Gandhi who has been biographized so profusely that almost every day of his life is now documented and known. The day that he spent in any part of the world is well documented. If you accept that fiction is incompatible with truth, which is often called reality these days, then Gandhi cannot be released from history. The life he led under the circumstances under which he was born and under which he had to act throughout his life, those circumstances will remain a constraint for our imagination and understanding. Yes, the biographical Gandhi will also be available, and there are various ways in which interpretation of Gandhi's biography are still possible. The magisterial biography of Gandhi, Ram Guha's work, acknowledges in its introduction that some documents are now just beginning to be available, and it will take another 10 to 20 years to sort them out to get a deeper picture of Gandhi's life. So there will be plenty to do if we decide that no, fiction is not the way to make sense of Gandhi. Rather, truth must remain in the domain of rational inquiry so that the reality of Gandhi